Hello everyone, this is Almost Certainly Not Pickles, and today I'm not doing anything video game related. Today I'm going to do something I like to call teaching. This is something I'm particularly interested in, and I figured making a video would be a cool way to explain it once and just point people at this video. I want to talk about evolutionary algorithms. Evolutionary algorithms, or genetic algorithms as they're called, are a way of optimizing complex parameters. I like to explain it as making entities with a specific set of rules in a universe of parameters. These little entities in the parameters compete in simulation, and they interchange their genetic code, how they handle different changes and variation within the simulations themselves. And I have a little example I prepared today. On this two-dimensional plane, there's nothing. You have the x-axis and the y-axis. Let's put a little guy in there. So this little guy, what he can do, and I'm going to use my mouse here, he only lives for a single click in life, and his purpose is to breed. And what he does is he creates someone identical to himself on each of his four sides: top, bottom, left, and right, and then he dies. However, I'm going to add something interesting in here. I'm going to give him a circle of life. He's not allowed to move, but what the circle of life does is whenever it touches one of his species, more than likely one of his progeny, it will extend their life by 3 clicks. And every click they can reproduce one on each side. However, they can only produce offspring on a side that's not being used currently. So if they're next to something, they can't put an offspring in that one little space. Also, they can't put an offspring in a shared space. So if you have one diagonal to each other, they can't breed where they would both put an offspring. We're also going to give him a little wall. I don't know if you saw that, but we're going to give him a wall if he can't put an offspring if it would intersect with the boundary of the screen. And so we're gonna proceed to generation 2. So we're gonna say goodbye to this guy and say hello to his 4 children. So as you've seen, he put one child on each side of him, and then he passed away as a little ghost here. And these guys are gonna do the exact same. So the reason they didn't put one where he used to be is because it's a shared space. The reason they didn't put one here in these 4 corners is because that's a shared space. They would both put an offspring there, and that killed off both of the offspring they would have put there. However, on the very, very outside were open spaces, and so the children there were actually placed onto the two-dimensional plane. And due to the abundance of space, this is one particularly successful generation. They all had children. One of them would have intersected with this fence that we gave him, so he didn't get to reproduce on that side. And due to the rules that I established early on, only one of them can reproduce, and this guy's going to repopulate the entire thing. And so now, this many generations in, we have one smiley face guy that has inherited the red circle of life. He has intersected the red circle, and that gives him an additional 3 clicks. Sadly for his brothers, they're going to reproduce and die as normal. So they've passed on. One of them couldn't reproduce because he was on 3 of his sides were shared with his brothers, and one side would have intersected with a wall. However, smiley face dude with who has survived past his life expectancy has managed to produce an offspring within the circle of life. His cousins are not going to be so lucky. They're going to reproduce and then die immediately. He's going to get a chance to reproduce multiple times more. So now we have, for the first time, 3 generations existing simultaneously. Yellow dude, who has inherited this red circle of life, has reproduced again. He couldn't put a child here, but he could put a child on every other side. And if I go back, it works that way. So he got to reproduce on all three sides and have a remaining child. This remaining child had a chance to reproduce, and blue guy's cousins also reproduced. And so if we continue on, it continues all this. And so this is a little preface for what I wanted to show today, and that is I've applied this type of science to magic. And so while the guys in the slideshow were unable to change the genetic code, they didn't actually they only asexually reproduced, and you could say like their genetic code, air quotes genetic code, was simply their x and y coordinates. And so they inherited either the x or the y axis, while the opposite axis changed by one, or up or down one. It's a little more complicated here. I'm using commander decks. It's a complex enough environment. There's just so many cards, and you could say like a deck of specifically a 100-card commander deck counts as a very specific setup for a genetic code for a deck. The way I've done it is very complicated, and I hope to explain a little bit of it. But I have programmed this in Excel, and so basically I created 10 different starter decks. I generated them procedurally using magiccards.info. I'll get into that in just a little bit. And so I started with those 10 decks, and I created programming that would let me have them that would pair them up in random order for fighting, each other in a magic game. In which case I used cockatrice due to I don't have to own the cards in order to build the deck. It's an almost perfect simulation environment. The one problem I have is I don't have artificial intelligence to run the games for me, so this is really just a major time sink since I have to run all the games myself and play both seats. But I'm going to get into that in just a little bit. So I have this little window here that tells me which deck fights which, like how the matchup is, and basically it just randomizes the cell number column and outputs the name of the deck. So I'm going to run through a game, and I'm going to show you how decks handle a win. The next game is Martin versus Karn, and so what I do is I'm going to go into Cockatrice, start a local game. Martin is right here versus Karn. Ready to start. I'll pull out the commander. There's Karn. Shuffle a mulligan. And do the exact same thing for the second player. There's Martin Stromgald. Set his life to 40. And mulligan. I'll double check both their hands for something that they'd be allowed to play before the game starts. I'm not really seeing anything on Karn. I'm not really seeing anything on Martin. I'm trying to do this as procedurally as possible. So then Karn gets to go first simply because he's on the top of the screen, and he's going to play a land. So this will give him a good, how does he want to attack? Martin wants to attack anyway. Shivan Dragon has flying. And holy shit, fire breathing. So that's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. And Karn dies. Alright. So, since Karn died, priority shifts to Martin. Martin gets to look at Karn's deck, and he gets to take one card. There we go. Alright. So I'm going to write here in my notes. Martin plus Kabuto. Oops. Generals Kabuto, just to make sure. Now, he also gets a random card that fits his color identity. So I'm going to go online to magiccards.info. And so I'm going to type in the special command. So I'm looking for a card that's either colorless, a land, any of the 5 colors, or a colorless or a land, or any of the 5 colors, legal in commander, and has a color identity of red. Color identity is very special. It looks at both the cost of the card to play, as well as the color of all cards, or all abilities. And basically, if it has a mana symbol, then that contributes to the color identity. And I'm going to set it to random list. And then hit search. There we go. So the first one that pops up is Warrior's Oath. So he's going to get Warrior's Oath. Now, to keep him legal, he has to also get rid of 2 cards. And those cards are going to go into a pool that Karn can choose from to replace the card that Martin took. So let's view the library. Now, it's up to Martin. Does he want to get rid of a card that is illegal for Karn to take and starve him out? Or does he want to get rid of a useless artifact and let Karn live? So I've decided Martin's going to get rid of Chance Encounter and Aeon Hub. Now, they're about to swap these. Karn gets to choose one of these to take into his deck. He can't take Chance Encounter because that's outside of his color identity. Karn is colorless. So he's going to take Aeon Hub out of desperation. So there we go. Not to mention, Martin also gets that additional card. Karn loses, if I can find it, Generals Kabuto. He gets Aeon Hub. Save him. Open up Martin. He loses Aeon Hub. He loses Chance Encounter, which is enchantment down here. Yeah, there we go. And he gains Generals Kabuto and the other thing. Warrior's Oath. Oh wow. Okay. There it is. So he's at 100 cards. There's not a duplicate of anything but basic lands. He's good. And so that was a game. Go back here, make a log of it, find Karn. That was his first loss. And Martin, his first win. So what that did was Karn has 2 more chances to lose a game before he starves. You'll see there's not a single deck here with a loss of greater than 2 because they have all died off. That is the death condition for cards. There's also a reproduction condition. There's 2 reproduction conditions. If they have an age of 5, they get to reproduce. Also, if they randomize themselves in a game. Let me see if I can find one of those. Ah yes, here we go. If they random themselves in a game, then they get a chance to reproduce. So I'm going to go ahead and reproduce Garzazal. So the way this goes is I'm going to rip my reproduction tools. I'm going to open up Garza in Cockatrice to look at the deck list. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and remove her from the list. Going to remove all basic lands. Go back here, random. So I have to use an existing legendary. So I'm going to search the deck for an existing legendary, cut out all spells that do not fit the new commander's color identity. Alright, so Xiaodun is the only legendary in the deck. If there were multiple, I would randomize. I would pick one at random. So here we go. We're going to make deck 45, which is Xiaodun, double check the spelling, the One-Eyed. Drag this down. Xiaodun is black. He has 0 wins, 0 losses, and he has reproduced 0 times. It's going to automatically fill in the rest. Make sure the action bar, yes. So this tells me if a deck needs to reproduce or get deleted or do nothing, depending on its age, wins, loss, replications, all that kind of stuff. Now we're going to get ready to reproduce it. We're going to go through and take out anything with a color identity of anything except for black. So it has to be mono black color identity. Also going to rename it. I said it was 45? I don't remember. 45, yes. So I'm going to rename it deck 45. Xiao. Okay. Alright, so now that we've removed all the non-black color identity cards, now it's time to put the entire list into Excel and randomly remove half. Alright, so I've managed to put the remaining deck list in here, and I'm not going to change any other cells from here on out until I manage to remove half of these cards. Alright, so in the binary, it says a 1, so Cranial Plating gets to stay. Move on down. Darkshield Pendant gets to stay. Fire Shrieker, Forethought Amulet, Helm of Kaldra, although I disagree with half of those. They're gone. Alright, so I've removed everything that has 0 by it, so that means I'm done using this list. Now I need to add basic lands. So I'm going to make it, so this is my basic land generator over here. It's this right here. And so the number of colors is 1. And so it's going to generate a total of 37 lands. So I'm going to go to the swamps. So he gets 1 basic land, 36 snow-covered swamps. Alright, so if he had 2 colors or more, then I'd put in, let's say, a 3. And if he was, say, plains, island, swamp, so if it was white, blue, black, then he would have 2 basic plains, 5 basic islands, 1 basic swamp, 6 snow-covered plains, 3 snow-covered islands, 7 swamps, but then the pity land, which is just a remainder, so I need to remove 1. Let me double check that real quick. Yeah, so I would have to remove 1. But since he's black, and there was no pity land, here we go. Alright, so now we're going to fill in this is going to take a while, so I'll see you guys in just a bit. Alright, so now it's generated. See you guys whenever he's a full deck. Alright, so I'm back. And so I managed to generate enough cards to get him back to 100 after putting in the lands. So sadly he didn't get any non-basic lands. All he's got are 37 swamps, which should be kind of alright. But basically all this was a way to simulate asexual reproduction. So half of the, or roughly half of the genetics were removed and were replaced with random input. So I'm going to go ahead and save him. So deck 45 Xiao. I had a Xiaodun, the One-Eyed, before, but he died off. Alright, so now we have a new addition. me write this down in our notes. Garzazal was reproduced into Jadun the One-Eyed. So we also need to make a note of this here. Garza reproduced once. So this is the first time. Alright, there we go. And so that shows, one competition event and then one reproduction event. And I also made a new little counter of which cycle we're on. It's actually not 27 because I didn't make this until much later. I didn't even track how many reproductions each deck had because the cycle is the sum of wins and the sum of reproductions, because each win constitutes the end of one competition event, and then each reproduction counts as one completion of a reproduction event. And so this is the number of events that have happened. I can't use losses in this because 3-player games, where if, let's see if I can find one. Here we go. So if Nico Bolas fought Lazav, fought Braids, then the winner of this would have one win under their belt, and both the losers would have a loss for that same event. So if I counted the losses, then I would have more. It would have recounted different cycles, whereas there's only one win per cycle if there's a competition. And so what I hope to accomplish with this is to learn a bit more about Excel, and from the tools you've seen, I would hope you agree, because I have this that sets up, not only does it show who's fighting by name, it shows how many games they've had so far, and it also looks at it and sees, it compares their relative power levels. There's a random cutoff point between 1 and 3 where it looks at the difference in the win minus loss between the decks. And if it's too big, then it says it's one-sided, as you've seen here. Hey, look, first one. So, Patron of the Moon has a greater win minus loss than the smallest win loss of here. So Endrick has a -2. So that's a difference of, see if I can find Patron again, of about 5 step. So Endrick was probably the smallest one there, because I don't think Braids has fought yet. No, Braids has not fought yet. I've also shown my land generator, how I generate the amount of lands that go into a deck that's reproduced, and also how I remove roughly half of the cards from a deck list, as well as exactly the process I go about to reproduce a deck, and that it's all taken note down here. I have scheduled events if there's a particularly interesting matchup that I come across. Whenever looking at these right here, I'll add it just as something interesting. Other than that, I just take them as they come. And that's really all I wanted to cover. I covered the basics of what genetic algorithms are all about, and also my own little pet project, which it is kind of nerdy that I'm basing this in Magic the Gathering, but it's really it's one of the most complex and varied universe of parameters I've seen, and I know it well enough where I can almost do it on autopilot. That being said, if I had a way to run a simulation of deck versus deck versus deck, then I'd be able to run through this factors faster. I have no idea how fast I'd be able to do it. But I'd be able to just let the computer run. Maybe if I even included it just trading cards at random and then killing off decks that don't fit their color identity, and decks that die 3 times in a row, or 3 times overall. I'm very, very close to automating it. This Excel sheet is a wonderful tool, and I've been running this for a while. The deck number here, I showed you Zhao was deck 45. That means I've generated a total of 45 decks, including the 10 that I started out with. And if I were to run this experiment again, I'd be sure to basically start over with all these tools. I'd probably just clear out all this data here, and then just start over with another stack of 10 decks. But yeah, that's what I wanted to show, and I hope you enjoyed watching. It's not one of the more interesting things I've done. You probably see me play Kirby 64, or if you found this on my channel, you probably would have watched Black Hole Rising. School's kind of difficult. I'll probably put out more of those in the future, but in the meantime, I hope you enjoyed this this thing I showed you, and I'll probably have an update later on whenever I decide it's over, and I'll be able to compare the cream of the crop to actual competitive deck lists and see where it gets me. But that would probably be several generations on down the line, multiple cycles down the line. Still really, really low. Generally, you don't see genetic algorithms getting any sort of practical results until 100, maybe even 1,000 cycles. So this is just a nice way to waste my time and do something I'm interested by it. So at least there's that.